Welcome, everybody. So hopefully you're all fully loaded after your coffee break. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about supply chain cybersecurity and what it means to all of us in the current situation, the current climate that we're in. Many of you may be aware of the fact that, or a number of you may be aware of the fact that just a few weeks ago, Toyota was hit by a supply chain attack. The reason why it was a supply chain attack is because although Toyota had a cyber attack that they suffered that caused them to actually take down their own production lines, the attack itself wasn't against Toyota. It was against one of their suppliers, a supplier that provides them with their digital, some of their digital screens. So they had to bring down all 13 plants and actually prevent 13,000 vehicles from leaving the factory on time. So everyone is at risk, but there's a lot that we can do as an organization, as a community to help defend ourselves against these sort of supply chain attacks. I've been in cybersecurity for about 20 years, working for Imperva for 3, and started off my career, early part of my career, in a company called RSA, two-factor authentication vendor. Many of you may be aware, some of you might still have those little tokens that you hang around your neck. And this date in particular was very important for me because it was the day that when I was working at RSA, the world changed. And the world changed because RSA itself was a victim of a supply chain attack. It was attacked by a nation state with a view to steal credentials that could then be used by this unnamed nation state to then attack a US defense contractor. Pretty scary stuff. The good news is that I was able to stand up in a conference not too dissimilar to this, actually eCrime over in Victoria, the following year and tell the story in a bit more detail than I'm going to tell you today. But the reason why it was a good news was because we were able, as RSA, to help our customers to protect themselves against that attack so that none of the vectors that were stolen or the credentials that were stolen were ever successfully used in any subsequent attack. The reason I call this story out is that it's a very good example of an early supply chain cyber attack. Unfortunately, 10 years on, it hasn't gone away. And as we all see, it's actually got worse. And when I presented at that conference in 2012, it was actually in the context not just of those sorts of attacks, but also financial crime. So how hackers were using Trojans and bot technologies to break into financial organizations and steal money, which at the time was the majority of our work. It was helping banks to protect themselves from financial crime. But as we all know now, data is far more valuable than just money, strangely enough. And if we fast forward 10 years, the problem that we see now, and this is across our 6,500 enterprise customers, is that a quarter of all the traffic on the internet is bot traffic. Before the break, my compatriot, whatever, from Cloudflare called out that they see that about half, 54% I think it was, of all the traffic that they see is API accesses APIs being used to run websites, run applications, run mobile apps. So we take the 54% and then we add the 25%. I don't know quite what's left. Are they the real customers? Who knows? Well, we do. So when we look at the industries that we monitor, unfortunately or fortunately, no one is immune from those sorts of automated bot attacks. And you can all see behind me that the usual suspects are sitting at the top. But we also see the sorts of industries that we talked about, like Toyota, where everyone is at risk. And everyone is at risk in the supply chain. And this is really the key point, is that too often we only think about our own network. We only think about ourselves and how do we protect ourselves against attack. But actually, I think it was the CEO of Bulletproof said a few weeks ago, following on from Toyota, that about 40% of the cyber threat actually exists in your supply chain, not just yourself. So what do I mean by supply chain? I'm not going to teach you to suck eggs, but there's essentially three principles, right? We have the traditional physical supply chain, We obviously have the digital supply chain, which is really when we think about APIs, connecting applications to talk to each other and work together to deliver the goods and services that we all enjoy. Then we have the software supply chain, the software code that is used and reused by lots of different companies when they build their own applications. The thing about the physical supply chain is that last mile matters more than ever. No one wants a slow delivery. No one wants their product that they ordered off the website to arrive in 2 weeks. They want it in 2 minutes in a lot of cases. So when we think about that extended supply chain and all of the companies that we work with, and we think about how we're reliant on each other, it matters more than ever. The last mile matters more than ever. And when we think about the digital supply chain, again, we can all think about the APIs that are connected to each other. But the other thing that's manifested itself is this realization from a lot of companies that they're over-reliant or heavily dependent on third-party SaaS providers to provide them the availability, uptime of their own systems. And if one of those providers was to be taken offline, and they themselves are at risk. And we saw this last summer. We saw one of the major providers of CDN and network connectivity actually come offline for quite an extended period of time. There was, they believe at one point, about a third of the internet was down in the UK, right? And so what's that leading to is companies are now, and this is one of my asks of all of you, to think more carefully about how you protect yourselves. How do you rely on the SaaS vendors that you rely on? They may offer high levels of uptime, but uptime isn't what it's all about. So what we're seeing is that our companies are splitting workloads and sharing them across multiple vendors to increase their own resilience, because they can't rely on just the resilience of the company that they are working with. And then, of course, common components, and I'll touch a little bit on that when we think about the software supply chain. The software supply chain, and I love this picture, for those you can see, it's so true. There are so many applications that exist out there when the application is reliant on just one tiny little piece of the puzzle, one tiny little piece of code, and in some cases code that you don't own, code that you don't update, to keep everything alive. And unfortunately, I can't talk about it, but there's a lot of examples in the physical world where this is actually comes to bear. And because most of the software that's being used by a lot of developers today isn't actually their own code, and they're taking it from open source libraries and elsewhere, they're actually putting themselves at extended risk because it offers the opportunity for the attackers to insert their own malicious code for exploitation at a later date. But remember how I said a quarter of all the internet was bad bots? Well, not only are they attacking the application to try and do malicious things, they're also using valid calls within the APIs. And before the break, you heard a bit about the technical detail of how APIs work and some of the things that you can do technically to protect yourself. But when we think about the APIs that we all heavily rely on, quite often the issues are it's a valid call. It's not a malicious activity. It's a perfectly valid call. It's just maybe done in the wrong way. Digital transformation is one of those phrases that I hate, but the reality is it is what it is, right? So everyone is trying to do more with less. They're trying to do everything faster. They're using applications in ways they haven't used them before. Mobile applications are used to directly connect to information. And what that direct connection does is it means that those APIs are sitting quite often directly on top of those sensitive data stores of PII or customer information. They're closer than ever before to the data that they're trying to protect. Which means that when we think about how we protect ourselves, it's no longer just good enough to protect that north-south, right? You protect the edge, have a funnel, look at all of the things that are coming in and block them. You have to look sideways as well, because that's how so many applications are built. That's how so many organizations talk to each other through those APIs. Because I'm conscious of time, the scale of it, though, if we think about enterprise organizations, is phenomenal. And this is very specific. We talk about this, on average, 300 APIs that are managed by organizations. Managed is that word that I'm going to call out because they're the ones they know about. Okay? And if we look at what Gartner was saying, and to be honest, I mean, we're only a few months into the year, and this is already bearing fruit. more attacks than ever hitting the API directly, because the hackers have worked out that it's actually a much faster route in because it's so close to the data that we care about. And so what I did was draw upon some research we did in our cyber threat research labs, and the little guy, the guy in the corner is our CTO, so I don't think he wants to know, I don't think I'm a little guy, Kunal, and he's talking about, in this presentation, what we saw in light of the last few weeks with Ukraine. And those of you who know what the OWASP top 10 is in terms of the top 10 types of attacks will see something rather unusual here, which is that, nearly. And it's on camera. That would have been embarrassing.
You nearly lost it.
And my boss took great pleasure in telling me how he almost fell off. He actually fell off a stage, so that would have been fun. The OWASP top 10 typically, historically, and you saw it in the earlier pie chart, looks at things like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, remote code execution as being the top activities. But what we're seeing right now is it's all at the API. It's all violations, 65 million. I mean, I don't know what that is as an order of magnitude, but you might as well ignore the rest. So it's not all doom and gloom. What do you need to do to help yourselves protect yourselves against advanced attacks? And looking across here, to see how much time I have left. Remember I said about the 300 APIs that we know about? Well, that's great, because that's the stuff we know about. But what about everything else? And what's underneath the iceberg is the thing we need to worry about. It's those third-party APIs. It's the shadow APIs that your team have put in place because they wanted to get stuff done. There are back-end APIs that you're using to connect your third-party service providers or your last-mile delivery providers. And that's where we need to focus. We need to provide, or you need to provide yourself a way of providing getting the discovery you need to understand not just the 300 you know about, but the 3,000 you don't know about. At Imperva, we help our customers protect their data and all paths to it. The way that we do that is by monitoring not just the application at the edge, not just the application itself, but also the data as well. So the ask is, and this is really where, if you're going to remember nothing else other than me nearly falling off the stage, you're going to remember the fact that it does start with discovery. We need to understand those 3,000 APIs that are out there that we didn't know about, because they're not the ones that we manage and pay someone to look after. And so through automatic discovery and deep discovery and then classification of the data that those APIs are actually calling, that's where you win. Okay? That's where you win, because what you're doing is you're able to then understand and balance the business risk that you're taking, because everyone needs to take some risk in the way they run their business, the velocity that you want to run at, the number of deploys a day, new changes to your application, versus the risk that ultimately puts in place. The other thing it does, for those of you who are security professionals, is gives you something good to talk about with your DevOps teams. So you're not going in there with you can't do this, you can't do that. You can actually have almost a coaching conversation, which is, we already know these APIs are existing, we already know you're connected to them, let us help you to help yourself protect them against those attacks.